Hello, and I bet you weren't expecting to see me. I wasn't personally expecting to see you. Yet, here we are because a year has ended, an annual year in which I have not uploaded for 6 months because I'm in my final year at university. And so, I can't resist an end of year list. There is something cathartic about it. It allows you to just put the year behind you, reflect on what you've enjoyed, and then just leave it in the dust. I read a disgusting amount of books this year. I finished on like 130, 140 ish books, which is abhorrent. Frankly, a worry. Reading for myself has very much been the coping mechanism for final year at university. So, what I've done is I've cracked it down to around 10%. I've tried to. By that I mean I've got 15. Five honourable mentions, then we'll do a top 10 in no particular order for the top 10. We're just going to vibe it. I dare say all of these books are incredible, and making them fight to the death would be a disservice to both the books and myself and my sanity. So, without further ado, Maisie, you're on my lap. We're gonna have to make do with the cat on the lap. Please let me know in the comments what your favourite books were, and also what books you're looking forward to in 2024. I've been creating a list. I feel like 2024 is pretty stacked right now. I just realised I didn't even put Wind and Truth on my 2024 list, so the thing is fully stacked. Now, is the first book purely here because one, I enjoyed it, but secondly because I want to show what a caring and loving and possibly perfect partner I am. I dare say it is because the first book is Jurassic Park. Whoa, look at this bad boy. I got Grace the Folio Society edition for Christmas. You may be thinking, Ben, getting a book that you just read that year in a special edition for your partner sure sounds like you got it for yourself and is using that as an excuse. Shut the fuck up. Nevertheless, Jurassic Park, me and Grace went to go watch the film. It was the anniversary in the cinema, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'd only watched it a couple of times in my life, and just watching it in the big screen and everything. Grace has been bullying me to read the book as well for a long time, and so I finally did, and it's very good. It's wonderfully different to the original for the beginning, and I actually think that makes the reading experience incredible if you've only watched the film, because there is an element of like thriller, mystery thriller to the opening that just completely enraptures you. And Michael Crichton's like character building and everything is incredible. Um, and really, the rest just feels like it's Jurassic Park. So it's just a great book. The same way it's a great film, it's just a great book. So that one seems pretty easy. The other one that's pretty easy as well is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I read this in January. So this one I have talked about on the channel. There's actually a review on the channel, I'm just remembering. So I won't go into this too much, but Picture of Dorian Gray is a classic for a reason. It just exudes quality. I'm not going to explain the plot because it's The Picture of Dorian Gray. Everyone understands that my man has a painting and he puts too much of himself into it. And as I said in my review, apart from one chapter, this book is perfect, but that chapter was fucking dull. So that goes in the list. Next installment is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This was a very big surprise to have it so high on the list. Talk about a hyped book. Talk about a book that I went into. Grace had been telling me to read it for such a long time. Everyone had told me to read it, and I went in thinking, is this going to be my cup of tea? Is it going to be up my alley? And it turns out it very much was. There's an ease to the writing style and yet a complexity to the characters that allows you to explore everything in such a digestible but layered way. It's weird that I enjoyed this book so much and yet I have no interest in reading anything else by this author. Like, I feel like this is a lightning in the bottle and I don't need to experience anything else because I feel like it would tarnish some of it. And so I'm just going to leave that there. It's about a woman who is a kind of reporter, kind of a magazine writer, and all of a sudden she's a nobody essentially, and then she gets the opportunity to interview and then write the biography for Evelyn Hugo, who is like a superstar of the old film era. And yeah, the story kind of follows that. It's a chronicling and unraveling of information that leads to a climax. Very good. Next is Blade of Dream by Daniel Abraham, which is book 2 in the Kithmar trilogy. Now, anyone who knows the channel knows that I love Daniel Abraham. I reread The Long Price Quartet this year and adore it just as much. I'm not doing rereads on the list, so that's the reason it's not here. Otherwise, it would be well up there. After Age of Ash was, I would say, a very standard entry. There was nothing special in my opinion. It was very, I read it and then it was, that was it, gone from my system. Blade of Dream is one that completely captured me, and it actually made me want to reread Age of Ash, and I cannot wait for the final book in the trilogy to come out, because I feel like I'm going to read all three just back to back and experience them all together, because the Kithmar trilogy essentially all takes place at the same time. It's the same year in a city, and so events that unravel in the first book influence and shift the second book that's taking place simultaneously. Events happen that you know where other characters are. You're following things that make much more sense and exploring mysteries that were set up in the first book. And so, as always with Daniel Abraham, the books layer and grow on top of each other, and they metamorphise what's come before and transform it into something new. And so, whereas Age of Ash, I think, missed on the characters. I was not interested in the characters. This one delivers on it. So as well as the amazing world building, as well as everything going on with the plot, I now was invested in the characters that we were following, and as a result, it had to be up here for me. It's still not there. It's not quite LPQ for me. But if the third book lands, then it will still be a great series. And finally, for the honourable mentions, Fires of Heaven by Robert Jordan. I read 3 Wheel of Time books this year. I read The Fires of Heaven, Lord of Chaos, and New Spring. And yeah, Fires of Heaven was my favourite. Everything that I wanted to happen in The Shadow Rising happened in The Fires of Heaven. Everything that was set up and I was like, oh shit, that's going to be so interesting to follow, happened in Fires of Heaven. So it just delivered on what I was hoping. When people say that The Shadow Rising is like the Wheel of Time opening itself up and unveiling what it's going to be moving forward, like moving away from the Lord of the Rings kind of template and opening itself up to being an original fantasy much beyond it. Everything that had me excited was delivered here. So yeah, Fires of Heaven was a great book, and it got me back into reading the Wheel of Time, because after Shadow Rising I went a big spans where it just didn't call to me. But after Fires of Heaven, I mean, I've read New Spring and Lord of Chaos relatively soon after, so clearly this got me back on the bandwagon. So there we go. Those are our honourable mentions. Get them out of the way. 100% also recommend every single one of those books because they're so good. But these are the top 10. These are the ones that when I think back, they just did something more. They did something that it changed the reading experience. I always feel like when a reading experience becomes visceral, when I feel it in my body, when I feel that my body's shaking, or because I have quite a nervous tick, I shake my legs a lot. And quite often with books, it's a time to relax for me. But sometimes these books just get deep inside of you. So they've either made me cry, made me laugh. These are the things that provide real visceral outlets for me. So the first one, which funnily enough did both, was Red Seas Under Red Skies by Scott Lynch, the second book in the Gentleman Bastard series. Now, I reread The Lies of Locke Lamora for a conversation that I did with Grace, Murphy Napier, and Bryce over at Shelf Centered, and we've done both books now there. And thank God for the invite Murphy gave me, because I don't know when I ever would have got back to The Lies of Locke Lamora, because I don't know, nothing called to me. And then all of a sudden, Murphy Napier's emailing you, asking whether you want to talk about it, and you think, maybe I need to give this Scott Lynch guy another chance. Red Seas Under Red Skies did everything right for me. Just, it was so up my alley, it was insane. Because at uni I was doing a module on literature of the sea. We were looking at that. We were looking at history of like pirates, etc. And so the plot of this book, if you've read it, completely submerged me. Like I was enraptured, learning about the history at the same time as reading something that's clearly drawing on it, and everything about that completely pulled me in. Um, this is hilarious, first off. It is such a funny book. It has one scene that's very Pratchett-esque. The tonal balance it does between heartbreak, anger, excitement, pure, like, just joy to then deeply dark and sad. Everything mingles together, along with hilarity throughout, that just creates just such a great vibe. It's like a perfect hybrid between an Abercrombie and a Pratchett, where like they feel like they should be antithesis of each other, but Scott Lynch finds such a like a place within that to create something very special. I'm back on the train. Republic of Thieves. I don't know when I'm going to get to that. Probably when the release date for the first novella that Scott Lynch is doing gets announced. I think that's probably when it will line up. Probably around the time I finish uni, when I have a bit more time. I think that's what will happen. Next up, this one. This one had me crying for approximately 150 pages. That's not hyperbole, it's not a joke. I bawled my eyes out just so much. This actually counts as three books, as I usually do with this author, which is just the entire Fits and the Fool trilogy, but specifically Assassin's Fate. Fool's Assassin is also incredible. I cried in that one quite a bit as well, but this one hits so different. I'm not going to go into specifics because it's the 16th book in a series. I dare say if I say anything, it's going to spoil something beforehand. So the main thing I want to do is just, this was the year of Hobb for me. I read 8 Hobb books. Makes now Robin Hobb my most read author. She has been entirely influential throughout the last 2 years of my life as I've read The Realm of the Eldlings. It's how I met Grace. It's been such a linchpin, no pun intended from Scott Lynch, but it has been a linchpin of our relationship and everything, and I have nothing but admiration and love for Robin Hobb and what she created. Read The Realm of the Eldlings. Do yourself a favour. If you find the first trilogy slow, trust me, I completely understand. Like, this is a series where when someone says, oh, I read the first trilogy, I don't get it, I completely feel you. You're wrong, but I completely feel you. And the rest of it, masterpiece. Nothing short of masterpiece. And it's another one that I cannot wait to reread, that fucker, because so much happens in the later trilogies where I can just feel how good that first trilogy would be again, because god damn. Next up, changing tact, we had 2 fantasy books there, so I thought I'd go for a nice little memoir. Annie Ernaux's Happening. I picked this up randomly from a secondhand bookstore. I've wanted to read more Ernaux, and yeah, I just found it and I thought, fuck it, why not? And this one is, so Annie Ernaux, her oeuvre is that she writes essentially small memoirs, little bits in her life, random memories that she wants to kind of ruminate on. And this one is about when she had an illegal abortion 40 years before the writing of this. So in 1960s, she gets pregnant and has an illegal abortion. And it's such a beautifully blunt recounting of this. Like, it is incredible how much emotion she puts into it, despite echoing how she felt at the time, which was a complete absence of emotion. The duality of that, the way that she balances being able to translate to the audience the lack of the numbness of herself, but also despite that still translate feeling that the author can that the audience can take from it, was remarkable to behold. It's super short, packs a punch, and yeah, it was just wonderful. In the darkest way that you can possibly say something is wonderful, but alas, it is what it is. Completely different tone again. I read the first 2 books of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I think Restaurant at the End of the Universe is my preferred of the two, but they're both 5 stars. Like they were both incredible. That it's like choosing between your children. There is a favourite, but you don't acknowledge it. You know, there's part of the same package. Once again, this is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It is a classic of the sci-fi genre. If you haven't read it, you've probably heard of it. You probably have an idea in your head of what it's about. Essentially, it's just a bunch of funny shit in space. It's Discworld in space. It's everything you could possibly imagine it would be. It's the smartest, dumbest jokes you've ever read in your entire life. I howled laughing throughout this. My housemate is a massive Hitchhiker's fan as well. He's listened to the radio plays when he was a kid and everything, and watched the film. And so, like I've done before, I typically, if I'm there with him, will read whatever I'm reading out loud. And so we were both dying laughing with me reading this book because it's just perfect. If it's what you want, of course. If you're not interested in absurd comedy in space, then steer fucking clear because it's exactly what it says on the tin. So you're not going to be interested. But if you are looking for that, if you're looking for just pure, unadulterated stupidity written in the cleverest way you've ever seen, then it's the one for you. Next is a book that I have read. So my no rereads was a lie. However, I did read this over a decade ago, and so I don't remember that. Do you remember where you were 10 years ago? I fucking don't. I was a child, sir. I was a teenager, 15 years old, just a little boy reading a book that was fucking crazy, and that was A Storm of Swords, the third book in the A Song of Ice and Fire series. And what a fucking baller ass book it is. Once again, third book in the trilogy, third book in the series, so I can't exactly go into the details. However, I view the first three books in A Song of Ice and Fire as an arc, and then the next lot would be considered an unfinished arc at the moment. For people who want to read A Song of Ice and Fire, upon reread, I would recommend reading the first three books. Stop there until a book emerges at some point, if it ever does. Because everything that has been built over the first two books culminates here. Everything iconic about a song. Well, I keep on trying to say the Wheel of Time. I don't know why, but everything iconic about A Song of Ice and Fire takes place in this book. I was shocked reading this book, being like, holy shit, like this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. So many wild pop culture, massive, era defining fantasy moments happen in this book, to the point where I was like, what happens in the fourth and fifth book? Because I've read them at some point and I thought that everything in this book was spread out between those books, because it is a marvel. It is an absolute testament to why A Song of Ice and Fire is so good, why I think it's worthwhile reading even if it isn't finished, and why I couldn't give a shit if George R. R. Martin doesn't finish this series, because reading those first three books is enough. Some of the best fantasy writing that I've ever read. And if my man is now old and doesn't know how to end it, then God bless you, sir. Just give up. Stop cock teasing us, you damn bastard. Just put the pen down. If Fitz and the Fool was my best trilogy of the year, the best series I read this year, then the best singular book has to be In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This has been mentioned on the channel. I am enraptured by this book. It was incredible. Essentially, it is a memoir written through vignettes. It's just a little entry each time. It uses In the Dream House as a prompt, and then uses literary illusion, techniques, tropes, etc. as a way of telling a story. And the story is of the author, as she was in her first real relationship, in a lesbian relationship, and it ruminates on how that love began, how fully just besotted she was with this person, and how that very quickly can turn to abuse and violence, and how those feelings muddy and just shift and morph and distort over time. It's heartbreaking, very difficult to read, incredibly written, um, completely original in the sense of I've never experienced reading anything like it. A memoir using the prompt manner the way it does, um, in the dream house in the sense of your promised imagination of a relationship in your imagined relationship, where you should be your safest, and then how that deviates and it's not the case, but you can trick yourself into believing it is. Incredible. Foster by Claire Keegan was just a little something I picked up. I really enjoyed Small Things Like These. I think it's a fantastic book, and I think Claire Keegan is an incredible writer. And as a result, I picked up Foster, and I loved it so much. This is another one that's super high on the list this year. Hence, it's in my top 10. Kind of seems unnecessary to state. But this follows a girl who's born into a family where, frankly, they're just cranking them out. She's the ninth child, and this is not a well-to-do family. They do not have the funds or the space to give full attention to this child, and as a result, she's fostered with a couple, and it's just about their relationship and how it develops and where she feels safest, and it hit everything. Like, it was another very emotional read. I think that Claire Keegan is a master of conveying as much meaning as she can in as fewer words as possible. Midnight Tides by Stephen Erickson is the fifth book in Malazan Book of the Fallen. I read House of Chains in this year, and I very much loved both. But Midnight Tides, I think, takes the cake for me because it was so fucking weird. It was so bizarre that I just utterly loved it. The first 100 pages threw me because, once again, as always, this is a reset. You go in, you're like, I'm 5 books in now. Surely I can grab. Who the fuck are these people? And you're in a complete new place, era, everything. And so adjusting to that was probably the trickiest adjustment I've had in Malazan Book of the Fallen so far. But the payoff of having a bizarre comedy in this book, like complete batty, absurd comedy, paid off so much because I've always thought that Stephen Erickson does amazing comedy in his books. I think that Malazan is an underrated, funny series, as well as being dark and bleak. And this one, rather than kind of gallows humor, which usually Malazan has, it's a lot of soldiers with a lot of dark humor. This is irreverent fucking nonsense, honestly, for some of this book. The rest feels very Malazan, but there are two characters in particular, I won't name them, but talk about a refreshing tone for the series, because I was grinning from ear to ear every time that they came on screen. They also, because they had such a dialogue between each other, those sections flew by. It was at such a pace you could gnaw through it. So it also made the book feel much faster than it typically would given the page count. And honestly, Stephen Erickson, it's crazy that he's so well regarded, but if I feel like he's regarded for one particular thing in terms of the world building in sense of the scale that Malazan has. Whereas, like, I feel like he's underrated in so much stuff, and comedy is definitely up there. I'm going to continue with Malazan next year, as I will with The Wheel of Time as well, and etc., whatever else I've mentioned. Next up was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I read this in January. I had an arc before it came out, so I was super hyped, super happy with it. And you could tell how much I enjoyed it because I actually got the signed edition with the nice sprayed edges. I'm not usually a sprayed edges guy, but this cost the same amount as the normal hardback, so I thought, why not? Everyone's talked about this book this year. It popped off. I was very glad to see it because this hit everything I was hoping it would be. Once again, another incredibly funny book. This was a strong comedy year for me. I had not realised that before, but a lot of the things that are up there, Midnight Tides, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Red Seas Under Red Skies, and this all have massive humour to them. Refreshing, to say the least. But this essentially follows that the main character is a kind of middling writer, had their first book, it didn't exactly pop off, and they're friends with an author called Athena Athena Liu. Long story short, at the beginning of the book, Athena Liu dies, and with her unfinished manuscript, well, her finished manuscript that she has not given her to her publisher yet. No one's seen it. Sat on the side. So our character takes that and passes it off as their own. And so it is a biting satire of everything public, like publishing wise. I know people are now coming out. It's always the way that when a book's been out, it's extremely popular. People come out and nitpick it. Personally, if you're looking for the most elaborate, like, this is a short, fast-paced thriller essentially. I don't believe it's trying to do everything that people ask it to do, and as a result, I feel like it's a disservice to what is actually able to happen in this book. Um, because it's so funny, it's so biting, relevant in terms of the topics discussed. It doesn't. I don't know how to describe it. It doesn't pick a side. It argues at everyone. It's funny because when I think about reading when I think about reading R.F. Kuang's other books like Babel, and I started Poppy War, um, like very dark books, very civilization is inherently fucked and we're all in it. And that is essentially what this book is as well. It carries that feeling of like, is there a protagonist? Get fucked. That everyone's a rotten. Everyone's rotten. And you're like wading into this cesspit, and if you're not on board for that, you're not on board. But it gives pure energy that I live for, which is just antagonistic satire. God bless it. May it stick around for as long as it can. And finally, one of my favourite books of last year was When We Cease to Understand the World by Benjamin Labatut. And he has followed that up with The Maniac. And I was buzzing for this book, so excited, because When We Cease to Understand the World was very much like In the Dream House, where it was something that was so refreshing. I'd never read anything like it before. And so I was really hoping that the next one would deliver. And boy, howdy did it, because this came out pretty much like I was reading the arc during the time that I saw Oppenheimer. Like, I'd got 150 pages in, watched Oppenheimer, and read the rest. And most of this book focuses on Johnny von Neumann, who was a mathematician that worked on the Manhattan Project. And so there was a strange echoing through a lot of the motifs and a lot of messaging in the book and the film. And so it was like, it was my Barbenheimer. I know I also enjoy Barbenheimer, but this was like a weird one where I'm like, okay, I'm going to read about two fucking mentalists working on the Manhattan Project, and how pure obsession of discovery blinds people to what should be ignored or approached cautiously. And it's funny, of course, that around the same time I was watched Oppenheimer, read this, I also read Jurassic Park, and Jurassic Park feels very clearly inspired by Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project and the dropping of two atomic bombs. I mean, in the film Jurassic Park, there is a picture of Oppenheimer on one of the computers, so like it's all there, and so I felt like I was living in this maelstrom of destruction during the summer. But if there's one book that I don't think I've seen anyone else talk about this year, I feel like I've seen people talk about, like, these are all extremely popular or classics or just in the zeitgeist, whereas Benjamin Labatut seems to have fallen between the cracks. And God bless him. If you take one book out of this, first off, it would be When We Cease to Understand the World. I would recommend that one first, then this. But Benjamin Labatut is one of the finest working authors, in my opinion, and I cannot wait for what he next produces, because everything has been stellar so far that I've read. Bearing in mind that the first book he wrote, the When We Cease to Understand the World, was translated into English, because English, I believe, is like his fourth or fifth language. The Mechanic is written in English. He wrote it in his fourth or fifth language, and it's fucking pristine, high level, some of the best prose I've read quality. It is insane how good this guy is, and it's a marvel to behold. I mean, essentially, that's my list. I came back, threw down some recommendations, and I'm gonna dip again because when I go back to university, it's time to write my dissertation. It's going to be intense, and I simply don't have the time or the willpower at the moment. However, this has been wonderful. I've really enjoyed sitting back down and doing this. I hope you enjoyed watching. Please, once again, let me know what your favourite books were, and I suppose I'll see you in probably 5 months' time, 6 months' time, half. Let's say June. What we'll do is I'll come back probably around June, give you my best of the first half of the year that I've read, and then we'll go back to regular programming. I think that's a good idea. I'm hoping that my phone's had enough storage this entire time and it hasn't stopped, because then you're not getting this video because I do not have the time or effort. However, love you lots. See you in the future. Have a nice new year. Enjoy 2024 and goodbye.